Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this MOVE session. Today we are going to talk about zero emission maritime transportation. I'm John Hervea. I lead the MOVE program from the regional office for Latin America and the Caribbean from UNEP. Very welcome. Thank you for being there. Very welcome to today's session. As I say, we will be talking about zero emission maritime transportation with Lucy Gilliam. Lucy joined Transport Environment in September 2017 after several years of consulting on environmental campaigns and having previously worked as a science advisor in the UK Civil Service. She also spent 5 months as a trainee at the European Commission Research and Innovation Directorate working on SME policies. Originally from the United Kingdom, Lucy speaks English, Flemish, and is also learning French and German. She holds a BCS in biology science and a PhD in modern microbiology, as well as a diploma in commercial coast and sailing vessels from Equestrian Nautical College. Lucy works in the aviation and shipping team at Transportation and Environment as a campaign and outreach specialist. Lucy is a ship owner and loves sailing, cycling, and spending time with her family at the beach. Today we have Lucy with us. Thank you so much for your time. We must say that Lucy is the first guest that we can assure that is going free emission presentation for us today, powered by solar panels. So thank you so much, Lucy, for your time, and the floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thank you, Yona. It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk about what the potential is for electrification of shipping. So a little bit about the format for my presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are as an organisation and what work we do and why shipping is such an important transport mode to decarbonise. I'm going to talk a little bit about the regulatory frameworks that we work within, so at the International Maritime Organization, and a little bit about the EU policy that we're driving where I'm based. And I'm also going to then do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the options for hybrid electric shipping and show some examples. So is that going to click through? Okay. So yeah, as Yoni said, I'm from Transport and Environment. We're an umbrella organisation, an NGO based in Brussels, and we represent a network of NGOs across Europe. And we are also a founding member of the Clean Shipping Coalition, which is a group of NGOs with observer status at the International Maritime Organization. So this is the place where we can feed into the development of regulations for the shipping industry. We're also a founding member of the Clean Arctic Alliance. So the Clean Arctic Alliance is an alliance of 22 not-for-profit NGOs, and we've been working on a ban for the use of heavy fuel oil as marine fuel in the Arctic, but we've also been working to tackle the issue of black carbon emissions from shipping. So when you look at the climate impact from shipping, a big part of it comes from CO2, but the second biggest climate issue is black carbon, these soot particles from shipping. More on that in a minute. So I just wanted to kind of set the scene a little bit as well and talk about why it's so important to tackle the problem of climate change, particularly for people in the Caribbean and South American region, because the effects of climate change is not in the distant future. Already, many countries are being impacted by the changing climate. And the tourism sector and the economies and livelihoods of people in the region already being impacted by sea level rise, erosion, extreme weather events, coral bleaching, flooding, drought. You know, the need to tackle climate change is urgent, and it's urgent wherever you are in the world, whether we're talking about the Arctic or we're talking about the Caribbean or in Southeast Asia. But the Caribbean and South America in particular has many unique and highly vulnerable ecosystems that are impacted not only by climate change, but also by the impacts of shipping. So what is how big is the scale of the problem for climate from shipping? Well, shipping is like the global industry is responsible for about 3% of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions each year. So this makes the sector, like if it's compared to countries, the world's 6th biggest emitter, with emissions equivalent to Germany. So it's really important that, you know, we don't leave them out, that we do act on the emissions from this sector. Shipping is also highly polluting. Most ships in the world burn the world's dirtiest fuel, which is called heavy fuel oil. And heavy fuel oil is bottom of the barrel, thick, viscous fuel full of lots of pollutants. The 15 largest ships produce as much air pollution as all the world's cars. This is like sulfur oxides, nitrous oxides, black carbon, as well as the climate impacts. These air pollutants, the sulfur oxide, nitrous oxide particulates, all have significant health impacts as well, and they contribute towards acidification. They can alter the pH of the water, erode facades and structures made of limestone, for example. And this pollution, you know, it's not bound by country borders. You know, it spreads with the prevailing winds, and so what happens in one area impacts another. Cruise ships, for example, an important part of the shipping in the Caribbean. Cruise ships produce 3 times more emissions compared to a similar sized cargo ship. This is because they have high energy consumption on board, and these emissions from this sector are growing rapidly, so we mustn't forget about them. So a little bit more about this problem of black carbon from shipping. So around 7 to 21% of global shipping climate warming impact can be attributed to black carbon. So black carbon is a particle that's black like soot, and it's a short-lived climate pollutant. It's a particular problem for the Arctic, where it's accelerating ice loss, and it's and driving the loss of Arctic sea ice. It's opening up the region to more shipping traffic, and it's contributing to an accelerating feedback loop of change in the region. But, you know, the changing climate in the Arctic, it has global consequences. You know, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. These melting ice caps are contributing towards sea level rise and changing of Atlantic currents, which is disrupting global weather systems. And this also poses a risk for low-lying nations and island states. So as part of the Clean Arctic Alliance, you know, we've been working through the IMO to have a proposal to mandate ships switch to distillate fuels, cleaner diesel fuels instead of heavy fuel oils, in order to prevent the majority of black carbon emissions in the region. And this is on the table for debate starting this Thursday, along with the other climate measures. So do reach out to your delegates and your representatives to get them to support ambitious action, not only on climate, but also on tackling black carbon. So where are we with climate action at the IMO? Well, this is also a topic on the table that's being discussed this week. The negotiations start again on Thursday at the Marine Environment Protection Committee. Unfortunately, the current proposals on the table at the International Maritime Organization are not aligned with the Paris Agreement goals. So look at the red line on that chart. What we're seeing is proposals will see emissions rise over the next decade. But what we urgently need is for emissions to come down. We need a 7% a year decline in emissions in order to meet the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. Now, this is really, really important. Like, you know, if we let temperatures rise beyond 1.5 or 2 degrees, we're talking about the loss of coral reef systems. You know, we're talking about extreme change that will have a huge impact on everyone on the world, but particularly on islands and tropical communities. So another question to ask: what are your representatives doing at the International Maritime Organization? Are they representing your country's interests, or are they representing those of the fossil fuel industry? It's really important that we get drawn up between what's happening on the global stage at the UNFCCC with the Paris Agreement and what's happening at the International Maritime Organization to tackle shipping. So, you know, it's not just, we mustn't just have global regulations. We also need to do our part in Europe to meet the Paris Agreement goals. At Transport and Environment, with our network, we're pushing political leaders to lead by example. We're responsible for 20%, 1/5 of global shipping. And we have technology and we can implement policy that can deploy and scale the technologies. And this is important because this will support deployment elsewhere in the world. And basically, it's not a case of either or. We can't solve climate change just by what we're doing in our own countries, and we also just can't solve it at a global level alone. We need to work at every kind of part of society, at local, national, international and global level, to tackle the climate emissions from shipping. So we do have a suite of operational, technical and fuel options to reduce the climate and air pollution of the shipping sector. We can switch to cleaner distillate fuels immediately. We can also slow ships down. We can use wind assist technologies, hull lubrication, and we can also switch to alternative fuels and energy for shipping. So battery electric, which we're going to talk more about, and also renewable fuels like e-hydrogen, e-ammonia are being considered as key technologies for different parts of the shipping sector. We've got lots of different ship types, and different propulsion will be necessary for those different ship types. We have a detailed report on this called the Roadmap to Decarbonise European Shipping, which is on our website. And so to do this, we at its peak, renewable electricity would need to grow 1 to 1.5 times the total wind capacity that we've already got installed in Europe. So this is a big challenge to switch to these new propulsion fuels, which it is possible. But what's really important to note is that we can't create a system where it's a case of just switching one fossil fuel for a renewable fuel. We also have to be really conscious, even, of the renewable energy that we're consuming, and to make sure that we're consuming these energy sources in an efficient way. So making sure that we combine efficiency measures with switching to cleaner fuels. So what are the kind of realistic and sustainable technologies that we have available to decarbonise shipping? So we have a range of different propulsion. We have battery electric, most suitable for short sea shipping, for ferries, for coastal shipping. This is already happening. The technology already exists, and there are hundreds and hundreds of ships already in operation around the world that are electric. Larger ships can also become electric, but the battery capacities might be too large for the journey they're doing. So they might be hybrid vessels that are combining the use of electric engines with fuel cells with green hydrogen, or fuel cells or combustion engines using ammonia as an example. Hybrid ships can extend the range of battery electric or synthetic fuel vessels by using technologies like sails and wind ships to basically enable those vessels to travel further. And the largest vessels will most likely require a very stable energy source like ammonia, for example, to propel those vessels. What's the kind of key takeaway point here is that there's no one silver bullet. It's going to be a combination of technologies that are required to decarbonise the whole shipping sector. But what's also a very important consideration is using the most efficient technology for the ship type that you have and the route that you're operating. Different technologies have different different energy losses, either in the supply chain or in energy transmission. And so this is a slide that shows you how much propulsion energy that you get out from the renewable energy that goes into different kind of systems. So if you electrify, you get 77% of that energy back out in terms of propulsion energy. Whereas if you use hydrogen, for example, the losses are far greater. Or if you would make a synthetic diesel or a synthetic petrol, that the amount of energy that you'd get back out at the end would be even lower. So it's basically, where possible, direct electrification will be the cheapest and the most efficient use of energy for propulsion. However, there are limits, and there are clearly limits at the moment to batteries and the size of the batteries that you would need, and the amount of propulsion energy that you can get out. So this graph shows some comparisons of a diesel ferry versus a battery ferry versus a hydrogen ferry in terms of costs and electricity costs and opportunity costs, which is revenue lost to the storage space being made over to either batteries or hydrogen, to be able to compare which is like the most efficient technology for the route you're sailing. And as you can see, the business case for a container ship operating between Singapore and Rotterdam is just not possible. You know, a battery ship would need to be almost the entire ship would be made over to batteries, so it's not really a viable technology. So there are limits to the distance that can be sailed with battery electric propulsion. However, you know, it's a important direction that we're traveling in, and you know, why hasn't the uptake for these new fuels or new propulsion technologies been faster for shipping? You know, we have this technology. You know, what's the problem there? And you know, there's a number of barriers, and so this is like, we mapped out what are the barriers to deployment of green ships here in Europe, but I think, you know, it's similar barriers that you've probably got in the Caribbean or South America. You've got the high opportunity costs of new vessels, so the entry risks of new zero emission vessels coming to the market. So the first ship is always the most expensive. And that can also, that can be a concern for investors. There's also a lack of fuel infrastructure or charging infrastructure. You know, this is a bit of a chicken or egg problem. Which comes first, the ships or the infrastructure to charge them? And also, you know, there seems to be like a lack of demand. You know, one of the problems that we've had with deployment of electric ships or electric charging infrastructure for ships is that it can be cheaper to continue burning your fossil fuels in your engine than to plug into shore power when you're in port, in a European port, because of the taxes that are put on electricity but not onto marine fuel. So, you know, some of these problems, you know, they require, you know, political policy intervention to be able to solve them. So how can you incentivize electrification? How can you make it possible that, where possible, electric powered ships you know, become the technology of choice and replace fossil fuels? So, you know, many different things that you can do. Start by gathering technical evidence and data. Look at what ships and vessels are operating in your waters. Look at what their regular route is. Where are they sailing from? How much energy do they require? And basically map out, you know, what would be the most appropriate renewable technology for those vessels, and look at what infrastructure might be needed. You know, talk about the environmental and climate benefits of electric powered ships. You know, there are many. They minimize noise and vibrations. You know, this has a positive impact on biodiversity, on fisheries, etc. You can optimize electric vessels on board. You can optimize any generators that you're using, which means that overall the ships are more efficient. You can reduce fuel consumption. Electric vessels are also more responsive and safe. So there's a lot of operational benefits from switching to electric vessels. Other things that you can do to incentivize electrification is make exclusive licenses for zero emission vessels. So this could be like you need a new ferry and you could put in place one of the rules for the person applying to operate that ferry and say that they get the license if they're operating a zero emission vessel. You can make public service obligations and you can subsidize zero emission vessels and shoreside infrastructure. And you could also look at whether there's any regulatory corrections that need to be made. So make tax exemptions for the tax on electricity, for example. You can designate your harbour a zero emission berth so that ships that come to your harbour have to be zero emission. They either have to plug into electric or they have to use another technology that means that they're effectively zero emission. Or you could designate your waters as emission control area so that you make it so that ships have to burn cleaner fuels or switch to clean technology. Currently, only US waters around Puerto Rico in the US Virgin Islands are designated an emission control area in the Caribbean. But there's no reason why Caribbean countries or South American countries couldn't go to the International Maritime Organization and designate their waters as an emission control area. And you could also apply malus schemes. You could apply charges to CO2 or to NOx emissions, for example, or you could incentivize clean ships by giving port discounts to clean ships visiting your ports. So yeah, you also need to make sure that you have the infrastructure for electrification or shore power. There's lots of different ways that you can do this. So if a ship is needing to recharge or become zero emission in port, you can literally have these like giant plugs that connect a ship to a grid or to a battery pack or some kind of power station to recharge the vessel. But there's also lots of innovations in this space. And this shows a picture of an inland barge in the Netherlands that has a containerized battery pack that they're using for propulsion. So lots of innovations and technologies are out there to find the right solution for your vessels and your waters. So now we get on to maybe the fun bit where we get to look at where their electric vessels already operating. So in Amsterdam, they've gone fully electric for their passenger tourist boats. Over 320 boats take more than 4 million passengers through the city's canals each year. And the local government has banned diesel engines from these city waterways by 2025 as part of an effort to combat climate change and also to tackle air pollution. And so many of these vessels are already operating electric. Ferries are also a great place to start electrifying because they cover the same routes again and again. This makes it really easy to plan for the range and the charging solution of all electric ferries. There are many all electric ferries all over Europe these days. This is a photo of the Ampere, which has significantly cut emissions, but also it's cut costs by 80%. So there's a big incentive. They found that these electric vessels are much, much cheaper to operate. This is a picture of Ellen, which is a large all-electric passenger and car ferry. She's 60-meter long, and she's operating between the island ports of, I think, Fanshav and Soby in southern Denmark. She's been electrified with 2 electric motors and it has a 4.3 megawatt battery pack. She was built as part of a European project, so first of a kind, and she's been in operation now for almost 2 years. So batteries are also making their way into cruise ships. So there's a few cruise ships these days that are plug-in hybrid ships. This is a ship from the cruise company Hurtigruten, and this ship can plug in when she's in port, and she can partially use her batteries for propulsion. So, for example, if they're in an area where they might be whale watching or they don't want to disturb local biodiversity, they can go for short periods onto battery power. But it's a hybrid system, so they also have diesel electric engines to recharge the batteries. And so, you know, this is fairly similar to where we started, maybe with electrifying cars. We started off with hybrid cars, and now we have fully electric cars. So this expedition cruise ship carries 500 passengers, and she travels between Norway and all around the Arctic. And she can run on a battery pack for up to 45 minutes in total. This is another example of a hybrid diesel electric cruise ship. This is the recently built square rig sailing vessel Golden Horizon. She's the world's largest square rigged vessel. She's based on a very famous ship called France 2, and she has 2 fully independent electric propulsion engines. However, the boat's primarily intended for sailing, and the operators hope that she'll be 80% wind propulsion, with the remainder from diesel electric. And so the company's sort of pioneering the use, the reduction of, you know, really trying to reduce as much as possible the consumption of diesel fuel. And this ship apparently will be cruising all around the world. This is an example of an inland cargo barge that's operating, I think, between Netherlands and Belgium. It's a dry cargo vessel with electric motors, and it has a 346 kilowatt lithium ion battery pack. And there's many more examples of this type of ship being built here in Europe. This is this is a proposal for a hybrid sail cargo ship. Again, a combination of electric propulsion with sails. So this one's currently, there's been a small scale model built of this vessel, but they're looking to build this, I think it's a car carrier in the next 3 years. This is a consortium led in Sweden. And finally, some people have taken matters into their own hands and launched emission-free shipping companies, which will operate in Caribbean and South America. The ship on the left is a vessel called Ciba that's being built by Sail Cargo Inc. in Costa Rica. And she will have a hybrid electric engine and sail, and she'll sail between the west coasts of North America and South America. And the vessel on the right is a vessel called Tres Hombres, an engineless sailing cargo vessel that's been sailing between Europe and Caribbean, trading rum, cocoa, coffee, emission-free for 13 years. She doesn't have a vessel, doesn't have an engine at all. And so these ships have been built by hand, basically, by networks of hundreds of dedicated volunteers who wanted to show what change is possible. And so I just wanted to include that in there, that, you know, there's at all kind of levels of society that and there are, you know, technologies for change, and not all of them are high tech. You know, there's some great combinations of old technology fused with new technology that are changing the industry. Okay, so if you want to find out more about the transition to zero emission shipping, do take a look at our latest report, and, you know, feel free to ask any questions. Happy to help and, you know, give information where helpful. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for the presentation. A lot of information that I didn't know about. So I hope some of our watchers did actually know something about. But thank you so much. I must say that I was amazed by the cleaner fuels spectrum of how much emissions can be reduced just by cleaning the fuels, actually, right? Because we would assume that is something that has already been done in many countries around the world. So you have the Euro standards for vehicles, and someone will presume that that will also go to all industries that use combustion engines. But I was amazed that this only kind of not technological, very challenging policy may actually reduce such a high percentage of the emissions. I was really amazed by that one.
I think one of the things that people don't realize with shipping is just how dirty the fuels are that shipping is currently allowed to use. It's like even in our mission control areas here in Europe, the diesel that ships can burn is still 100 times more polluting in terms of sulfur than what we allow on our roads. Now, that's in an emission control area. You don't even have emission control areas in most of your waters. So the amount of sulfur that's in the fuels that the ships visiting your waters is burning is 500 times more polluting.
Wow. So, no, that's amazing, actually.
We have a long way to go.
A big challenge, but something that I'm just relating all the things that you say, and I'm thinking how much of the barriers are related to technology. As you saw on the graphic, you cannot go to Singapore on electric battery ship, because that's not worthy. But then how much of that is actually related to technology being not so developed versus having policies that are not there, lacking policies that can actually change rapidly, or kind of rapidly, what is going on right now in our waters, without needing to develop really or invest a huge amount of money or another boat technology.
Yeah, I think with electrification, like the technology really is there. There's the battery technology has advanced a lot, and already there are so many examples of battery electric ships. So it's all about creating that policy environment to enable people to be able to operate, to be able to kind of operate in a cost-effective way, to be able to recharge their vessels, and also for the energy infrastructure to be in place to provide the energy to those vessels. So it's not just having sort of the plugs in ports, but it's also making sure that you have the electricity being supplied to the grid as well, scaling that technology there. So it's like you've got to take a kind of whole systems approach, and you've got to design it, and you need policy to be able to kind of make that change to support the first movers, and to make sure that people can also feel safe investing in that technology, that they're going to be able to keep using their vessel, and they're going to be able to recharge it, and in the long term. So I would say for electrification, it's all about like getting that policy in place now. For the and similarly, for the ships that the cargo vessels that are going between Asia and Europe, we do have that technology, but it's expensive. We've got to bridge that gap between cheap fossil fuels, which are untaxed and don't pay for their carbon pollution, and the new fuels, which are they're more expensive. And of course they're more expensive right at the beginning. As you start to scale those technologies, then they do become cheaper over time. So we need carbon pricing, and we need technologies to be able to enable that.
Mm-hmm. I would like to ask you a question about the infrastructure, actually. When you were talking about the infrastructure on the ports, and how can that be? Because I'm imagining, and I don't know if that's just what I imagine, what it looks like. For example, in the Caribbean countries that are not so far one from each other, but actually will, maybe having a vessel will go from one country to another country, then you will have to have charging infrastructure in both countries and having kind of an agreement that they will pursue commonly the same goal of maritime shipping electrification. And then related to what happens normally with the vehicles, that is the interoperability of the technology. Is that also an issue with the ships?
Yeah, yes, but I think this problem is mostly being solved because there are ISO standards around like the technology and the connections of ship to shore. So it's that's not such a big problem anymore. There is also a challenge about the what is it called, the electrical current, like making sure there's compatibility between like the current on board the ship and what's coming from the grid. But these are known things, and I think the most important thing is coming up with a regional strategy and agreements between countries. And one of the ways that you could do that is by moving forward with things like emission control areas, that cover an area, and then having these kind of measures as part of like developing and meeting these emission control area standards. So what you want to avoid, especially I imagine this would be a big concern for tourism dependent countries, is you don't want people avoiding a place just because you put much stricter rules in place. So everybody needs to kind of work together and make sure that there's a level playing field, so that everybody's moving forward together, and you don't end up with like some ports being ambitious and then basically they're losing out on tourism or trade as a result. People aren't going to do that, so you do need to join up and work together on this.
Yeah, that is one of the questions that we are receiving for the audience. Is you talk about the IMO at the beginning of the presentation. So
yeah.
Would that be the case to create a common baseline, or for a common agreement at least, so the countries could, I don't know, apply or commit to transition?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got the kind of the global greenhouse gas strategy, which is like ongoing at the moment, and negotiations are kicking off again on Thursday to agree the first short-term measure and an efficiency proposal for shipping. But unfortunately, those proposals are they're not going to drive technological change. Unfortunately, they're so weak. Talking about an efficiency goal of minus 22%, which is effectively business as usual. I think if you go back to maybe I can flick back to the slide that the red line of the proposal at the IMO is basically business as usual. We really do need to get much more ambitious regulations, because that will drive change, that will make it safer for investors, or it will support technology deployment. There'll be all these sort of domino knock-on effects. But that isn't the only game in town. Countries can come together and they can work together to designate their waters as emission control areas. We're doing this in Europe as part of a consortium where we're calling for a Mediterranean emission control area. So, a network of countries and NGOs in countries of Spain, France, Malta, Greece, etc., wanting to have the same level of protection for their waters that we have in Northern Europe and in the Baltic and in the English Channel. And so that's currently like in process at the IMO to get that area designated as emission control area. So Caribbean, South American countries could do the same. And, if there's networks of countries or NGOs that wanted to follow that path, I'm sure there are people in our coalitions that would be able to, help advise like what that process looks like. So that's a really good first step. An emission control area can mean that, first of all, ships have to switch to cleaner distillate fuels. And that's a little bit of like bridging the price gap to new fuels. And I'm sure there are other measures that could be incorporated in there that also support driving electrification. You know, in the emission control area, countries could designate all of the ports as clean ports if they wanted. You know, it'd be really ambitious, but it could be done. You know, why not solve an air pollution problem and a climate problem at the same time, and start with that thin end of the wedge. You know, it's easy to electrify your time in port, and then then you can go from that to electrifying short journeys. And as the technology develops, people get more used to it, get trained in it. You know, costs come down, then you can electrify longer and longer journeys.
No, really interesting. Actually, I was thinking about how, as you say, in the Northern Europe, that they already have these coastal areas, then the low emission coastal areas, I want to mean. How does it affect the private companies, not only the ones that use the vessels, but actually the ones that build the vessels? So are they somehow changing or transitioning not only to electric, but to, as we were talking in the beginning, to cleaner fuels, to more efficient fuels, all these kind of things? Because I guess that for a company that is, you know, selling ships on for the Northern European countries, they will have a standard and say, you know, we go with the same standard for everyone.
Yeah. So I mean, these stricter rules, they provide opportunities for new companies, you know, to come in and sell the technologies that meet those standards and meet those rules. So, you know, there's all sorts of innovations, you know, that have come in and have been supported by creating ambitious policy. The way it works with our emission control areas is that ships have the option to either switch to cleaner fuels or to burn heavy fuel oil with scrubbers, or to have engine standards that reduce the amount of NOx. Now we're really advocating to not go down the pathway of using heavy fuel oil and using a system called a scrubber to remove the sulfur, because scrubber systems, they basically take the pollutants out of the exhaust, the sulfur oxides, and then it ends up in a wash water that gets discharged overboard, and that has negative consequences for the marine environment. But you know, you can make an emission control area and designate your waters as sensitive for biodiversity, etc., and you can remove scrubbers as a compliance mechanism, and you can put in other options to meet that goal of reduced emissions. So, you know, electrification could be an example of one of those technologies that could be there, as well as switching to cleaner fuels, the cleaner diesel fuels, for example. Yeah, so it provides opportunities for the companies that are selling diesel filters and catalyst exhausts and all these sorts of things that can build cleaner ships.
Yes, I think that the idea, what I take is that it doesn't have all to be electric. It is a combination of many things that can go step by step, going from where we are now to where we want to be in some years, right? So yeah, no, thank you so much. We do have some questions. One of them is there any synthetic combustible being developed for maritime purposes only? Do you think it would be a viable solution? So having other fuels, synthetic fuels, using for maritime transportation?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about that. For example, you can combust ammonia, and there are engines being developed by the engine manufacturers that are capable of combusting a range of different fuels. So they would also be able to combust methanol or synthetic diesel as examples. There are quite a lot of potential synthetic fuels. The one thing I would caution is, again, to think about efficiency. You know, to make a synthetic diesel from renewable energy requires a lot more energy. So, you know, you lose a lot of energy in the process of adding a carbon onto hydrogen and then to make a fuel that you then combust again. So you get 16% efficiency for electro diesel compared to, I think, what was it, 44% efficiency of combusting hydrogen directly. So that's one thing, efficiency. The other thing to caution around is so some of those fuels like methanol, for example, or different biofuels or ethanols, which are options that are on the table. You have to be careful about the feedstocks for those biofuels. We actually have very limited amount of biofuels worldwide, and some biofuels have quite significant impacts on either biodiversity. So if you're switching from, you know, one land use to another to cultivate biofuel crops, it can impact biodiversity, or you can end up with land use change emissions. So for example, one of the big problems with palm oil is that you get a huge amount of losses of carbon from that soil system. That means that when you add up the sums, you know, those biofuels end up being a lot worse in terms of climate than just continuing to burn the fossil fuels, which doesn't really make sense. So it's really important to, you know, to think about the supply chain, think about what's available, and think about sort of some of the wider impacts that might result from those different, you know, combustion fuels. So, you know, make sure you choose one that's going to be good in the long term, and you don't invest in a technology that's going to become like a stranded asset in the future either. So there's a lot of talk about LNG as being a shipping solution. The problem with LNG is it's still a fossil gas. Well, yeah, LNG is a fossil gas. Can make synthetic LNG, but then it's still a potent greenhouse gas, still you know, methane is a potent climate forcer in its own right, and there's big issues with losses from the engine or in the supply chain. So again, it's like, it doesn't help us get to our climate goals. I did include some slides at the end of my presentation because I thought these things would come up. So yeah, this is a slide that's all about limitations for biofuels. So yeah, again, focus on technologies that are scalable. And, you know, this is a slide about LNG, you know, the cure is worse than the disease. And even the World Bank is calling on regulators not to support LNG. So, yeah, I think it's really important to kind of look at some of those, you know, take a holistic approach basically, and look at all the potential issues before selecting a technology.
Yeah, thank you so much. We do have 2 more questions. The first one says, do you know cases and information on on-grid connected ships to transport people and goods in relatively small distances between 10 and 20 kilometers between islands? I guess there are the examples that you put at the end. That ocean bird hybrid vehicle with that one looks amazingly futuristic.
Yeah, this is designed for transatlantic, so making good use of the trade winds. But of course, between Europe and the Caribbean, that is, you know, it's the slave triangle, isn't it? And you know, let's reinvent it with modern technology and without all the negative social and environmental consequences. But I think also, you know, this is the ferry Ellen. You know, she's a car and passenger carrier, and she's doing a regular route of 21 nautical miles. You know, and that's, you know, technology developed 3 years ago already. There's been vast improvements. So, you know, there's huge potential, I think, for inter-island sort of cargo, ferries, etc., to be electrified or to be decarbonized.
About that, to all the people that are watching the session today, the next session on the 13th of July will be precisely about this electric ferry. So if you want to know more about this ferry, we will have Anne Coltari talking about it next month. So stay tuned. Just as as a commercial for the next session. We have another question. Says, are key geographical sites like the Panama Strait and the Strait getting involved in the transition? I guess they are talking about the Panama Canal or the Egypt one. They are looking into regulations, I guess.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, Panama has had some, the Panama Canal has had issues in the last year with climate change and drought, and there not actually being enough water in the canal. So I'd say like the Panama Canal is at the front line of climate change. So you would think that Panama would be highly motivated to tackle shipping climate emissions. Unfortunately, what we find is that Panama, one of the world's, I think it is the world's largest ship register, is possibly one of the least ambitious when it comes to climate regulation at the International Maritime Organization. So if there are any Panamanians here on this presentation, I would say, like, you know, it's really in your best interests to join up on your climate policy and your international maritime policy, because, you know, you're facing those changes. Now, I don't know what's happening on the canal practically, but you know, I imagine that at some point I imagine there is already electric charging points, but they're probably for smaller vessels and for leisure cruise yachts. But you know, having a plug for a small vessel, it's not that different technology, just bigger and bigger plugs and requiring a bit more energy. So I'm sure that transition is underway. But yeah, I just would, you know, reiterate the point. There's some quite large ship registries with a lot of power in the Caribbean and in South America, and they are, you know, we really need to get these countries to really like stand up and fight for more ambitious climate regulation. It's in everybody's interests. So, you know, make sure that what countries are arguing for at UNFCCC in the Paris Agreement, that they're coming with a similar message to the International Maritime Organization. That's so important. You know, don't allow these delegations, which often have a lot of industry on their delegation, to make rules that undermine the security of people living in your countries.
I was just thinking that if Panama Canal and Suez Canal will get involved in regulations with the standards of emissions on fuels and all these kind of things, that will be a game changer, because this is kind of the strips where all the vessels go by, right? So if they go strict, then everyone will have to comply with whatever they say.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so that would, if they put in place incredibly strict emission control standards for those areas, yeah, it would definitely be a game changer. Unfortunately, you know, I work for an NGO in Europe, and I don't know that many NGOs in those regions, so I'm not sure what fires I could start in those places to make that happen. But maybe someone here on this talk is there, and they can you know, they can take the mantle and run with that idea.
Yes, I was just getting into the conclusion that so the regional office of UNEP is in Panama. We used to have the office just in front of the canal, so we will see the vessels go by all day long, and obviously we thought about it. We thought about those vessels and the pollution that they got. And as you say, the Panama Canal has this problem with water, so they are concerned about what is going on and how they will keep on doing their business and having this trade on their soil without getting more water than what they have, because that's actually a big problem. So if anyone from the Panama Canal is hearing us right now, please go, because it doesn't seem like, but I guess that both Egypt and Panama have a long or a big power in this item worldwide. So take advantage of that. You could be the change that we need. Okay, so I think we have a last well, it's just I was thinking about another questions, but I think is something very similar what I would talk about. If there is this linkage between technology and regulation, and what is the next step for the countries. But I think that you already said that regulation, keeping this regulation step by step, would be the first step, right, from the situation that they have now.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing in Europe is we've got a whole suite of regulatory proposals that are going through as part of our European Green Deal, as part of the package that's being put together to tackle the whole of Europe's climate impact. So, you know, we have something called the MRV, which is monitoring, reporting and verification of emissions. So all ships that call at European ports have to report to the Commission on an annual basis their climate emissions, their CO2 emissions for the journeys between Europe and their last non-European port of call. So what we've got in the pipeline is a proposal to use that emissions data and then to basically create a kind of polluter pay scheme. So we price the carbon for those journeys, and we take the money from that pollution basically as part of our emission trading scheme, our ETS scheme. And then we use that money to invest in a maritime climate fund. So we take the money from polluting ships and we invest it in companies that are looking to green their shipping and to decarbonize. So that's one thing. We've also got a regulation that's going through at the moment, which is called EU Fuels Maritime, which is all about setting like goals, mandates for the amount of zero emission fuel that needs to come online between now and 2030 and now and 2050. Yeah, and we're also looking to influence the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive to make sure that hydrogen infrastructure is put in place, battery electric charging infrastructure is put in place, you know, shoreside power, and as well as putting in place, you know, European-wide rules for a zero-emission berth standard, so that when ships do come to Europe, they either have to plug in or perhaps use a generator or store battery power in order to have no emissions while they're alongside. So that gives a little bit of a flavour of you know, some of the kind of regulations that we're looking to put in place to tackle our shipping climate impact. And you know, we're liaising with NGOs in China and also in North America. You know, there's proposals in those countries to replicate the European MRV system. This is also something that Caribbean countries or South American countries could do as well. We could have a similar scheme worldwide and finally put a decent price on carbon and drive that change. I guess I want to make a final point on that. So one of the big things that people get really, really concerned about is if we put a price on carbon for shipping, is it going to mean that prices of goods go up significantly for people and, you know, poor people are costed out of their basic goods? We've done a little bit of work on that in the European context. We've looked at a variety of consumer goods, bananas, trainers, iPads on kind of standard journeys. The thing is, shipping is so cheap right now that even if we put a high price on carbon, like double the current ETS price, it would present such a tiny increase in the price of those goods. You know, we're talking about, you know, 0.06% increase in price, because the majority of the price of goods is elsewhere in the system. Shipping is simply so cheap right now that the consumer, the end buyer, wouldn't notice if we put in place some ambitious climate regulations. So hopefully that will make people think, okay, you know, maybe this is something that we could look at.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that number that you gave is absolutely nothing compared to the price of whatever good you will receive. So yeah, as you say, I think that makes a good point to pursue the strategy, the electrification of transportation, maritime transportation. So thank you so much, Lucy. We come to the end of today's session. Thank you so much for your presentation, for sharing all your knowledge.
You're welcome.
And all your proposals. Thank you for all that are today with us in the session. As I told you, next month we will be talking about the Ellen electrical ferry. We will have another session this month in Spanish that we will talk about first responders capacity building in case of electric vehicle incidents on the road. So stay tuned with us. Thank you again, everyone, for staying with us today, and thank you so much, Lucy, for all your time and presentation.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.